Thanks. It's very exciting to be here speaking to you folks today. For the past, come in, there's still space at the front. Or down back, maybe. Okay, I'll just let folks take their seats. For the past 3 years, I have been working at ANZX to lead up the Android team, building their new application called ANZ Plus. There's a couple of other folks from the team here today that are also presenting. But today, my talk will be about zero tech debt. And I wanted to begin with a story. I would like you all to cast your minds back through the mists of time, back to another world in 2019. Back when the world was a very different place and a younger version of me was turning up at the ANZ office in the Docklands for his first day on a brand new project called ANZX. ANZX at that stage was just a handful of people. We had 3 developers on the iOS side who had already been there for a while, and I was coming in to be one of the first Android engineers. Now, I think everybody here has had this experience of walking into a new job, walking into a new project. Think about the things running through your mind. I know this one sounded really exciting, but also like working at a big bank. I wonder what that'll be like. And I've been on a lot of projects before with really tight deadlines and lots of delivery pressure. Wonder if it'll be like that. On my first day, I went out for coffee with this guy, Renaud. Renaud is a very talented iOS developer who had come in to help lay the foundations for the iOS app. And over coffee, he said a few things to me that were so memorable. I now repeat them to every Android engineer to join the team. Renaud said, what we're trying to do here isn't to sprint forward and hit some particular deadline to release the app. Instead, we want to set the foundations for what ANZ is doing digitally for the next 5 to 10 years by building a great product with a forward-facing code base, a code base that engineers will want to work on. And he said, we have the privilege of having the time to investigate and set things up properly. And this freedom has come from the top, from stakeholders who understood that if they want something great ready for the next few decades, they have to invest the time up front, rather than going in all guns blazing, doing the same type of things that we have always done. And I'm sure many of the people in the room are familiar with from various projects. Renaud said, if we rush to meet a deadline and then the code is a mess, or the team burns out, we will have failed. 3 years later, and there are now over 1,000 people working in the ANZX program. We released the first version of our app into the store 12 months ago, and you can go here to this URL if you would like to learn more. By any measure, the program has been a great success. The app has proven very popular. We're currently sitting at 4.8 stars in the Play Store. We're rapidly acquiring customers, so quickly, in fact, that we're the fastest growing new digital bank in Australia. Since we released, there have been a stream of new features that have been enabled in the app, such as increased daily pay limits, video chat, BPay, Pay ID, dynamic CCVs. Our home loan proposition is in the final stages of testing at the moment. We've also grown from 5 developers in a room to the largest mobile team in the Southern Hemisphere. There are over 150 engineers working on the app across iOS and Android. Despite the rapid build out and extreme scaling, we still frequently hear from new starters how surprised they are by the quality and consistency of the code base. Frankly, if I could go back in time and tell the 2019 version of myself what we were about to create, I would have said it's impossible. Like, you can't do that. You can't scale like that. That many devs working in a code base will create a mess. Now, you all read the session title, right? You know where this presentation's going. So spoiler alert, I'm gonna talk about how you should have zero tech debt, right? It's there in the title. And you're gonna sit there in the audience thinking, well, of course it's easy to have zero tech debt if you've got 150 engineers and a brand new code base. And you might be right. I do invite you to consider that the exact opposite might be true, that many engineers rapidly added to a project could create a truly epic mess. But it is true that ANZX's situation is quite particular. Hence this disclaimer, you're probably not ANZX. Our circumstances may not apply to you. But what I hope to do today is to deconstruct the concepts behind technical debt and look at how we go about finding balance. And I hope that these ideas resonate with you and help you approach tech debt with a fresh perspective. So let's get into it. Let's talk about what tech debt is. But before we get into dictionary definitions, let's start with a question for the audience. I hope you've got your arms warmed up. Hands in the air if you have some tech debt in your code base that you're working at the moment. And I have my hand in the air because I know we definitely do. And see, did you see around the room? Did you see how many hands went up? Maybe I don't need to define tech debt. Without even telling you what it is, we all know we've got a bunch of it already. And right off the bat, maybe this tells us something about tech debt. Tech debt is very much a I know it when I see it, eye of the beholder thing. Perhaps that definition isn't so important after all, or perhaps it's that tech debt is a complicated thing to define. If you ask developers or managers what tech debt is, you tend to get an answer along the lines of it's a little bit like taking out a loan. The canonical version of this comes from Ward Cunningham, inventor of the term tech debt. Now, those of you down the back, I can see you squinting. You don't need to squint. I'm about to read the quote out because I think it's very important that we hear what tech debt is in the words of the person who invented the concept. Ward says, with borrowed money, you can do something sooner than you might otherwise. But then, until you pay back that money, you will be paying interest. I thought that borrowing money was a good idea, and I thought that rushing software out the door to get some experience with it was a good idea. But that, of course, you would eventually go back, and as you learned things about that software, you would repay that loan by refactoring the program to reflect the experience as you acquired it. So the term tech debt is an analogy, and humans love reasoning by analogy, particularly when it comes to hard to understand and nuanced things. If you have something that's hard to understand, and it's similar in some respects to a thing that you do understand, you can take a mental shortcut and say things that are true for A are also true for B. And this is great. It allows us to reason about things that we don't fully understand. We can use all this knowledge that we have for A and just apply them to B to help us make decisions. And so we say that tech debt is like taking out a loan. Now, we have a complicated relationship with debt here in Australia, but borrowing money to invest in an asset is an appreciating asset is generally considered a good thing. You take out a home loan and you get to live in the house today while you pay off the loan, right? Meanwhile, those house prices, where are they going? They just seem to go up and up and up, don't they? So by the time you pay it off, the value of the thing that you bought might have doubled or tripled. But is this analogy actually helpful, or does it lead us astray? Let's dive in and pull the analogy apart. Is A really like B? Or have we in fact invented a clever way of justifying poor decisions? Let's start. First up, we'll ask ourselves, do we get the thing we want today without having to pay for it up front? And with a financial debt, the answer is yes. you get your house today without having to pay the full amount. And with technical debt, the answer is also yes. You get to merge your PR, you get to ship the thing. Are we taking on some kind of obligation that you'll have to pay off later? And with financial debt, the answer is yes. You need to pay back the money that you've borrowed. And with tech debt, the answer is also yes. You do need to go back and clean up that code. And will we actually do that? You're supposed to, but does it happen? With financial debt, the answer is yes. You will pay it back or they will repossess your house. There is a legal framework in place to ensure that the money will be paid back. What about tech debt? We all laughed before, didn't we? Do we actually land up paying it down? It's a bit more debatable, isn't it? Sometimes we do when we're feeling like it, and sometimes maybe we don't. Is there a legal framework in place to ensure that people are taking on debt responsibly? With financial debt, yes, there is. There's a whole bunch of legislation in place to ensure that banks do not engage in predatory lending. We are required by law to ensure that the products we sell are a good fit for our customers. What about on the code side? Does the law protect us from taking on a debt we can't pay? Ha! Of course it doesn't. In most places, all you need is a PR review that says, looks good to me. We've essentially got an unlimited line of tech debt credit, which we can draw on anywhere, anytime, anyhow. And there are people all around us encouraging us to take on that debt, saying things like, come on, just ship it. Hey, Luke, can I get a status update on your task? Is it done yet? Is there anything we can do to move faster? Can we go bankrupt by taking on too much debt? Yes, and yes. If we take on too much tech debt, entire code bases need to be thrown away. Companies can drown under the tech debt and go bankrupt. We can find it impossible to hire developers. We've got probably a whole bunch of mobile engineers on the room. How many of you want to be jumping into Java code bases and Objective-C code bases? So just to reiterate the current state of play, there's basically nothing in place to ensure that we need to pay down tech debt. In fact, we often need to fight for the time to do so. There's no limit on how much you can take on. In fact, we're often pushed to take on more. And if we take on too much, the results can be catastrophic. It's no wonder software is such a mess. But we're not done deconstructing this idea of tech debt as an analogy just yet. Is there an appreciating asset we've brought with our debt? Yes. You get a house of bricks and mortar, and those do tend to go up in value. You can live and work in that house. No. All you've done is you've bought yourself a code base with the longevity and strength of a wet cardboard box. And that code base isn't going to get more valuable as time goes on. As bugs multiply and simple features take months to implement, it becomes apparent that you haven't bought yourself an asset, you've in fact bought a mess. And some of you might be saying, well, it's not the code base that you buy when you take on tech debt. What we're actually buying ourselves by taking this debt on and shipping really rapidly is time. We're buying ourselves time for our idea to be successful, time for our business to grow, time for us to learn more. Time is definitely an asset, but it's debatable if time is an appreciating asset. You're probably not going to have a lot more time in the future, which you can easily use to pay down the tech debt. You're probably going to have about the same amount of time as you do now. Do we know how much debt we've taken on? Yes, yes, we can. You guys can all pull out your phones. You can have a look at your bank statements. You can see how much is on home loans. And no, we can't, because tech debt lives up here. It's really subjective and difficult to quantify how bad it is. We all know it's there in our code bases. We all raised our hands, but how much have we got? Do we know how long it will take to pay off? Yes, there are millions of home loan repayment calculators on the internet. And no, we don't even know precisely how much there is. We struggle to get time to pay it off. So why would we have any idea how long it would take? So what can we conclude? It's looking very obvious that, in fact, tech debt is not like taking on a financial debt. I believe that the analogy is actually harmful. Tech debt as an analogy gives us a false sense of confidence. It allows us to justify doing things that we, in fact, should be very, very skeptical of. If I told you I was going to take on an obligation that needed paying back later, but I had no idea how big it is, no plan to pay it back, there was no oversight in place to ensure I was making a responsible decision, you would say I was insane. But as soon as we're sitting in a planning meeting and we rave around the term tech debt, everyone disengages their critical faculties. They're like, oh yeah, some tech debt, say no more. We'll take on some of that to meet our sprint goals. Let's have another crack at asking ourselves, what is tech debt? And we'll see if we can come up with an answer that actually helps us make good choices. How does this sound? Tech debt is just another term for unsuitable code. That's it. Just unsuitable code. Code that doesn't have the properties that we want it to have. So where does this unsuitable code come from? The number one reason code should become unsuitable is because we learn something new. Maybe we've got feedback from customers that have sent us in a different product direction. Maybe some new technologies or libraries have been developed or released. Maybe as engineers, we've learned something more about our craft. Sometimes we merge code with an understanding that it may be better, then there could be some better ways to do it, but we haven't had the time to uncover them yet. And sometimes we've chosen a simple approach to something with the understanding that we'll replace it once it no longer scales. And we may have hit that point. And honestly, I look at all of these things here as good. We want to be growing. We want to be learning. We want to be improving. Every day as engineers, we should be realizing that some of our code is now unsuitable because today we are better developers than we were yesterday. Where shouldn't it come from? It's a really short list. The pressure to ship stuff quickly. At the moment, it's merged. All the code we write should be suitable. The insight is really obvious. If we know our code is unsuitable, why would you click the merge button? The list of things on that previous slide is already long enough. So why are we adding code that we know isn't suitable? Do not merge unsuitable code. There should be only one quality of code that gets merged into our code base, which is the very best we can make it. Now, I can see some people shuffling around their chairs, and people tend to freak out at this point because they think that I'm saying things that I'm not. People think, wait, my code needs to be perfect. How do we ship everything? How will my code get merged? We don't want unsuitable code, but we need to deliver rapidly, incrementally, and reliably. How can we resolve this paradox? And just to be really clear what we're talking about, for a lot of devs, this manifests as pressure from the business to ship more features, which eats up all of the available time. Firstly, we realize that this is not a paradox. Continuous delivery is not deliberately bad code. Again, you don't merge unsuitable code. This way of thinking about tech debt and taking out a loan and it being a positive thing to help us move quicker is corrosive because we fool ourselves into thinking that to move quickly, we need bad code. And we fool ourselves into thinking that we will fix that bad code up tomorrow. And neither of those things is actually true. You do not need bad code to move quickly. We're shipping the ANZ Plus app twice a week into the stores. There's a continuous and rapid flow of new features, all of those 150 plus engineers pulling together. Delivering rapidly and reliably is not bad code. Instead, it's all about balance. We have a bias towards good code. At the same time, we don't delay features forever trying to perfect the code. We have a bias towards merging code and shipping. Otherwise, we'll just spend forever polishing things. Instead, we always need to be asking ourselves how we can deliver code of the highest quality quickly to our customers. We shouldn't be adding unsuitable code. Instead, we should discover that code is unsuitable when we have learnt something new, which is actually at the core of what continuous delivery is all about. We want to deliver so that we can learn and iterate. There is no paradox. If we keep adding unsuitable code because we are under pressure, this will actually destroy our ability to deliver rapidly, incrementally, and reliably. Our goals are in fact in alignment. We want that rapid, reliable, and incremental delivery. We want to learn from that and improve. We want to create a long-lived code base that forms the foundation of what ANZ is doing digitally for those next 10 years. And these goals all point in the same direction, towards zero tech debt. The challenge is just realizing that your goals are in alignment doesn't actually solve the issue. Just sitting here in the audience and watching this presentation isn't magically going to make any of those pressures that you folks are feeling go away. Instead, that balance between tech and delivery can only be found by continually having hard conversations. It's always a negotiation, and many developers find this very difficult. How should we have these hard conversations with the stakeholders? My first tip would be to always look for the areas where you agree. If you put two people together in a room, there is likely to be an infinite number of things that they disagree on, but you're not going to make much progress poking at all the areas where people differ. Instead, you're only going to get traction when you focus on the things that you do agree on, the values that you have in common. And as we just saw, there's actually a lot of agreement. Our goals are in alignment. So use that as an opening to ask questions, to approach the situation with some curiosity and tease out more things that you align on. What are some trade-offs that we can and can't make? How can we deliver sooner? How can we deliver more reliably? How sustainable does this need to be? Secondly, as developers, as engineers, you are all experts in tech. It's why you get hired. So it's very natural that you will need to explain the tech side to other people in the business. Many developers find this really hard because when people start asking questions, they think that they're being challenged, or we get really worried that we're about to be told we're not allowed to do something. But actually, being able to explain things and demonstrate how better code aligns with the goals of delivery is a critical skill for us all to develop. You all need to be educators. Lastly, I've noticed that in many situations, developers tend to feel powerless. It's like the boss said we can't spend time on that. But I think we often underestimate the amount of leverage that we actually have. At ANZX, we work hard to ensure that engineers are empowered. But even in the worst, most micromanaging environments I have seen, and trust me, I have worked in plenty, developers are the ones writing the code. And we tend to have a fair amount of control over how we work on a day-to-day basis. As the person writing the code, if you say something should be done in a particular way, just that say-so is actually quite powerful. We're experts in our domain, that of software development, and we shouldn't be shy about sharing that expertise or having opinions that are informed by it. If you do find yourself facing a lot of pushback, it might be a signal that you should, again, look to go back and find where you agree, which leads us back to explaining and demonstrating and exercising influence to make changes. This is actually a cycle that never ends. We've looked at what tech debt is and how zero tech debt supports continuous delivery. To help guide our approach to tech debt at ANZX and the mobile team, we needed something more practical than a few sort of highfalutin ideals. So we've developed 4 principles. It's important that you choose an approach towards tech debt that makes sense for your own situation. However, I do hope that these principles can provide some inspiration. Our first principle is that we should always be driving towards zero tech debt. In particular, there should be no tech debt that is old and none that is big. These things have a habit of metastasizing throughout the code base. When we learn that code is unsuitable, we make a plan to how to make it suitable, and we execute that plan rapidly. This is because the longer unsuitable code stays in the system, the more it costs to fix it. Just because we're driving towards zero doesn't mean that we will ever hit it. Here we've got a totally made up graph that shows tech debt over time. And as we go forward, tech debt goes down. But it doesn't hit zero because as engineers, we learn new things. We discover code that we previously thought was suitable is now unsuitable. Now, there's no such thing as perfect code, but there is code that is as good as we can make it. And so we are constantly driving back down towards zero. And because we're constantly learning and shipping new code and discovering new ways things can be improved, we know that we'll never actually hit zero. And when we learn new things, we make a plan and we execute on it. What matters is not the hitting zero. What matters are these lines. We're always heading in the right direction. Why? As engineers, we're always learning. We're always discovering that the code is unsuitable. But if you're not striving for zero, the only other alternative is a graph that goes like this. And you can see that while there are some times the debt is paid down, the long-term trend is clearly upwards. This code base will not last for 10 years. You might say, oh, but we aim to keep tech debt at a sustainable level, but driving down towards zero is too hard. The challenge is keeping it steady at a set level requires a really fine balance. Do you actually have a clear idea of how much tech debt you have? Can you judge when it's getting to be too much? How can people even make that call? These graphs here are very subjective. Saying that code is unsuitable is a complex judgment call. And what's going to happen is that actually unconsciously over time, you're probably going to land up drifting upwards. Instead, I believe this is the only sustainable long-term pattern. You always need to be driving towards zero aggressively. Principle number 2 is no surprises with a happy emoji face. A squad shouldn't reach the end of a sprint and be shocked to find they missed out on their sprint goals. Engineers are in squads to deliver customer value. Some of that value is ensuring that we have a reliable and flexible and long-lived code base that can be rapidly changed. But a large part of the value that they're there to deliver is in shipping customer-facing features. As we saw before, we must balance the value of the customer features with the value of technical uplift. Because you folks are the ones on the code, it is engineers that need to be empowered to set that balance. And it's their job to make good choices. Keeping their squad and stakeholders in the loop and explaining the trade-offs involved is vital. It's natural that engineers should field curious questions from their squad on the technical aspects of their work. Giving visibility on what we're working on, the risks, the uncertainties of what we're doing, and the value it provides is part of an empowered engineer's job. Principle number 3 is we must clean up our code regularly. Technical work takes time. Discovering how to make things better takes time. Improving things must be an ongoing and sustainable process. The app ships weekly, so we aim not to have TikTok releases, where one release adds new features, and then the next one follows with stability and performance fit cleanups. Instead, we work at a steady pace, regularly cleaning up code as we go. At ANZ, we have no spend Friday cleaning up tech debt because we are constantly cleaning up tech debt. This needs to be scheduled and where appropriate included in the sprint goals. There should always be an unstated sprint goal of, and we need to have a well-maintained code base. Time for working on tech debt cannot be squeezed out by constantly setting ambitious goals that we can't achieve. Our last principle is communication and common sense. We should lean on communication and common sense. So many problems, it turns out, can be solved by just talking to people. Engineers need to communicate with each other to agree on technical directions and how best to live up to our principles. They need to communicate with their squad to understand the business priorities, to feedback information on what they're working on, and to be transparent about progress. Communication, common sense, and trust trumps dogmatism and working in isolation. What do we learn? How do we get to zero tech debt? Firstly, by realizing that you won't reach zero, but you do need to be constantly heading in that direction. That bias towards zero tech debt needs to be matched by a bias towards shipping. And both delivery and tech are helped by zero tech debt, but you will always be needing to have conversations and educating people. There are 4 principles that have helped us at ANZ. Drive towards zero, no surprises, clean up regularly, and communication and common sense. You may either want to adopt them as your own or develop principles that reflect your own unique situation. Thank you. Have we got any questions?
Silence. Oh, here we go.
Oh no, this is a question from my boss.
Yeah, not a hard
context.
Who came up with the principles? Like, was that a collaborative effort? Was it the first few people that were in the project? How did they come about?
I think the principles really developed over time, and it was a very collaborative effort. A few of the key leaders that were brought on relatively early in the project were very key to setting this direction. I was definitely very passionate about it. But that tension with delivery, we did find that we hit a point where our technical team was wanting to head in one direction and the delivery was wanting to head in another, and we hadn't balanced off that tension. We hadn't found that agreement and alignment. So we went through a process of getting all of this down and documented, going through some big conversations and getting consensus in the team around how we should do it. So ultimately, this was a group effort. Where this all comes from, it lives in a document that sits in our code base that went through a pull request and got approved by the team.
Cheers for the presentation. I'm wondering if a home loan isn't a good analogy to tech debt, what is a better analogy?
I do not know the answer to that question. Maybe you could give a good presentation one day when you come up with one. I do know that analogies are helpful. They help us make those mental shortcuts. They help us make quick decisions. But I believe that what we need to do is, instead of just taking this mental shortcut with tech debt, we actually need to dive in and get a deeper understanding of it. And reckoning with that, building up that understanding both within you as engineers, but across the businesses that you work in, is critical to where we're going as an industry. So maybe the answer is not that we find a better analogy. Maybe the answer is that we find a better understanding. And maybe in 100 years' time, somebody will be saying something else. Oh, it's just like tech debt.
Thank you.
Time for one more.
Thanks. Do you prefer to see it tracked when you said it's part of the sprint work? Do you like to see like a tech debt register and backlog tickets, or do you like to see it as part of the acceptance criteria, like in existing sprint work? Like, what's your kind of preferred way to visualize it and to have those conversations with product as well?
That's a great question. And the answer to all of that is yes, yes. What I haven't had time to go through in the presentation is we would develop some really practical guidance about how we should apply this at ANZ. And it comes down to a whole bunch of different levels. If it's something that's just going to take less than a day, the engineers should just do it. They shouldn't need to take it in and get it justified. So long as it fits with our principles of no surprises, just do the work. You don't need to get any buy-in. If it's something larger that's going to take weeks of work to do, that needs to be worked into your sprint goals. Maybe you put up stories, maybe it's part of acceptance criteria. We have longer running things that will take months to years to execute on that need to be tracked and coordinated at the program level. Ultimately, though, it comes down to those principles. No surprises, communication and common sense. And whichever approach can best deliver on those within your organization is probably the right one to go to.